Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, the State of 911 webinar series, hosted by the National 911 Program. My name is Dane, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about federal and state participation in the planning, design, and implementation of next-generation 911 systems. It includes real experiences from leaders overseeing these transitions throughout the country. Today's session features two presentations. The first led by Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program, and the second by Jason Jackson, the Executive Director for the Alabama State 911 Board. Both sessions will feature a short Q&A after the speaker's presentation. For more information on future National 911 Program webinars, or to access archived recordings or learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to National 911 Team at mcp911.com. If you are experiencing difficulty with the WebEx application, please call WebEx Technical Assistance at 1-866-229-3239 and select option 1. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in a listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. To ask a question of our presenters, feel free to take one of two actions. Using WebEx's chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, enter your question at any time during the presentation and it will be entered into the queue. Or, to ask your question live, use the raise hand feature to request your phone line to be unmuted and you'll be called upon to ask your question. With that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program. Lori, please go ahead.
Thanks, Dane. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Our format for these webinars is usually for the first half to include a presentation from a federal agency on an activity they're involved with related to 911, and the second half is always a state or local 911 system, giving them the chance to share their experience in implementing some component of NG911, whether that would be technical, administrative, or otherwise. We thought we would share some information with you today from the National 911 Program with regard to the 2014 National Progress Report. It is a progress report of data collected from the states about their 911 systems. So without further ado, if you could go to the next slide, please. What I'm going to be covering in the next 20 minutes or so is an overview of what the National 911 Profile Database is, how it was developed in terms of the data collection process, share some results of the data collection, just a few examples. We're not going to go over each data element. And then what we plan to do next in terms of data collection and combining data with other agencies. That should take about 20 minutes, and then we'll be open for Q&A if you have any questions about either the database itself or the process or anything else related to this project. Next slide, please. So let's go first to what the National 911 Profile Database is. It is comprised of 55 data elements, and those data elements are split into two groups. The first group is comprised of demographic data that characterizes the status and basic functions of the state 911 system. So this is all data that was submitted to the national level from each of the states. In the second part of the data profile, what you will find are data that measure and report state progress in terms of implementing advanced NG911 systems. So the system is divided up into two parts. Next slide, please. Just to tell you a little bit about how this all came about, we started this project about 5 or 6 years ago. The first thing we did was we went to the National Association of State 911 Administrators, or NASNA, and asked them the question about which data elements would be useful to them and would be feasible to collect. And they're the ones that came up with the 55 data elements that you see in the National Profile Database today. We then worked with a team of NASNA members as well as a contract team to develop data definitions and to develop the online data submission tool, which has been used subsequently by the states to submit their data. And collectively, we're calling that system the National 911 Profile Database. So after that, the system was implemented, and the NASNA members worked with their local PSAPs to compile the data. They've also continued to work with the National 911 Program team to refine the data definitions over time. What you will see in this report is that data was collected initially in 2011, and this report reports out on data that 2013 data that was collected from the states during 2014. Also, what you'll find in the report in terms of each data element is a standard format, if you will. The question that is posed that we're looking for the answer to by that data element, the data definition, as well as the results of the collection that was done on the 2013 data. Obviously, we could not have done any of this without the NASNA members and their staff, so we thank them very much for all the effort that went into this. It took a lot of work, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Next slide, please. So just to go on to sharing some of the results, just to clarify, for the purpose of this profile database, we defined a state as a state or a territory, so we refer to them all the same way. And what you see on this map here is that we did get 39 states to submit data. And that is purely on the basis of, volunteering to submit that information. The National 911 Program does not have the authority to mandate that, which is why so much credit goes to NASNA and its members for submitting their data. What we also found out, though, even for those states that were not able to submit data or did not submit data, is the reason why. So for the remaining states that you see there in navy blue, I'm not going to tell you which ones. That is in the report. But for those remaining states, there are states that are experiencing significant challenges in terms of submitting or collecting data. So there were 3 states with either no regulatory or no statutory authority to collect the data. There were 8 states that could not either collect or aggregate the data simply due to really limited resources at the state level. There were 3 states that we established a state point of contact with but did not receive a response from. And there were 2 states where no point of contact was ever established at the state level. But we're very pleased, frankly, with the fact that we were able to get 39 states to submit data on the basis of volunteering to do so. So this is still a new process. It is one that we will continue to refine. What you will also see in the database, sometimes there are multiple entries for every data element. And what you will see in the report is sometimes the states put unknown for those things. And unknown could mean they really don't know the answer. Unknown could mean they don't have the resources to figure out exactly what that data is in their state. It could be a number of things, but you will find that in the report as well. Next slide, please. So for the first group of data elements, the baseline data reflect the current status or basic characteristics about the functions of the state 911 systems. And you see the list there of the data elements that you'll find in this portion of the report. Things like the total number of calls received, how many authorities there are, sub-state authorities, the highest level of service provided, the number of primary and secondary PSAPs, as well as information with regard to revenue and cost. So these data elements are largely descriptive in nature, and they are intended to provide a general demographic view of the existing 911 services across the country. Next slide, please. Because the data are broken down state by state, these data can be very useful to the states as well as other 911 stakeholders in terms of developing policies and planning and implementation. And we thought maybe the best way to give you an example of that, perhaps a general example, is just to ask the question, for example, if you are in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the 911 board may ask, how do we compare with other states with regard to any of those data elements that were listed in the previous slide? Well, there are two approaches to answer this question using the National 911 Profile Database. You could either review the data of the states that share your borders, assuming they submitted data, or you could review the data of the states whose data most closely resembles the Virginia data. And if we go on to the next slide, we can sort of play that out for just one of the data elements in the National Profile Database. So this data element is the total number of calls received by the state, and you can see that we paraphrase the data definition. The data definition is the total number of 911 calls received, even if not answered or no dispatch occurred. And you see the types of calls that the total number of calls includes. So for the 30 states that did respond, the total number of calls is broken down state by state in descending order. And you can see Virginia is about 2/3 of the way down in that first column there. So if the question is raised with regard to how Virginia compares with other states in terms of the number of calls they receive, your first option might be to look at the surrounding states. So North Carolina is about 1/3 of the way down in that first column. Maryland is right below Virginia in that first column. Washington, D.C. is about 1/3 to halfway down the second column. So you can pick out the states that share borders with you and find their data there and compare it and see how your state compares with theirs. The other option might be to look at the data of the states that most closely resemble yours in terms of this data element. So going back to Virginia, they have about 4.5 million calls, you can see there, and you can see that Indiana and Maryland and maybe Minnesota are all sort of in the same ballpark in terms of the total number of calls received. Then depending on what what you're trying to get at in terms of the operation of your system, your 911 system, you could contact those states and ask further questions of them to really help you figure out, what your next move might be with regard to policy or planning or moving forward with your own system. I guess the most important thing we'd like to relay about this is that you don't have to contact each state for their information separately because the data for the states that have submitted are all right here, and that is the value of this database. Going on to the next slide, we just thought we might share another data element from that first section with you, and this one I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else. This is the number of primary PSAPs within a state, and you can see just by looking at this map how much the number of PSAPs vary from one jurisdiction to another. I don't think I've ever seen this displayed on a map before, and we thought, particularly having this kind of information is going to be useful to both local and state 911 authorities as well as folks in the private sector, perhaps folks at the federal level who are really interested in supporting 911 services. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to move on to the progress benchmarks. So the progress benchmarks are the data elements that are in sort of the second half of this profile database, if you will. And those are the data elements that focus on the status of the state's efforts to implement NG911 systems and capabilities. These benchmark data elements are more process-oriented, if you will. And you can see on this slide here how the process is broken down in terms of the state's progress in implementing NG911. It asks questions of the state whether or not they have a state plan for NG911, whether or not their state has a concept of operations, whether or not a request for proposals has been posted, if they have contracts in place, if they have NG911 components that are being installed or tested, and those are listed out in some detail, and whether or not there are agreements in the state with regarding to originating service providers and connections to their NG911 systems. You'll also see there the percentage of NG911 systems that are operational for call taking per state, and that's because in many states they're doing this a region or a locality at a time. So in some states they've done this as a statewide system. In other states, they've done it as a regional system that covers only a portion of the state. And so the NASNA members felt that both of these data elements you see listed on the bottom here are important in terms of measuring their progress. The second data element measures the percentage of NG systems that can coordinate directly over an IP-based network with external organizations. And, frankly, with the advent of FirstNet, and as that moves forward, perhaps this data element is going to become really important information for those folks to know about. Next slide, please. Just sharing a couple of benchmark data elements from that second half of the National 911 Profile Database. This is the data element that refers to whether or not the state has contracts in place for the implementation of some component of NG911. So this captures whether or not a contract for an NG911 part, function, or component has been awarded. And you can see on the map here that there are 13 states that in 2013 did make such awards, or as of 2013 had made such awards. So clearly a lot of progress has been made in the last few years with regard to the implementation of NG911. And the next slide, if we could go to that, shows that in another format. This is not a slide that you will see in the report, but we thought it was important to share with you the progress that has been made just since the 2011 data collection. So this has to do with, again, a benchmark data element. This is the data element that refers to the states that can process 911 calls, specifically ANI and ALI, or automatic number information and automatic location information, using NG911 infrastructure. When we asked that question in 2011, there were at that point only 3 states that were able to do that. As of 2013, you can see on the map here, there are 13. There are 13 states that are able to do that. And we're confident, even just on the basis of anecdotal information, that this map will continue to change in terms of the progress of NG911 and its progress, because I think we're just beginning to see the bell curve of the states implementing their NG911 systems. But clearly there has been progress, and it is being documented by the states in this National 911 Profile Database. Next slide, please. So next steps. One of the things that we did in 2011, which we are pleased to tell you that we are going to do again, is combine data with NENA. If you've been to NENA's website before, you know that they have a map on their website that refers to national progress on IP network, ESINet, and NG911 data. And we have been working with them for the last few months to harmonize our definitions with each other's. And while neither database is complete, when we combine them, there are very few states that are left out of that picture. And it's probably the most complete picture available on the status of NG911 deployment nationwide. We anticipate that that report and that map will be released probably in June of this year, so stay tuned for that. And we are also beginning to move already on collecting 2014 data from the states so that we can continue to chronicle the progress of the 911 systems. So we're working with NASNA as well as our team to begin that process and make that happen so we can come back next year and tell you what kind of progress continues to be made in the 911 system. I believe if we go to the next slide, that is it for me in terms of the information that we are presenting on the National 911 Profile Database. But if there are any questions that you have, I'd be delighted to try and answer them for you.
Thank you, Lori. And as you said, we're going to move into our Q&A session. As a reminder, to ask a question, please use the WebEx chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, or press the raise hand button so we can unmute your phone line. Lori, I'm not seeing anyone asking any questions right now.
Okay. No, that's fine. I believe there is contact information there. My contact information is also available on 911.gov. So if anyone has any questions, you can certainly ask them later on or at some other point in time. But thank you very much.
All right, and now I'd like to introduce our second presenter, Jason Jackson of the Alabama State 911 Board.
Thanks, Dave. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to Mission Critical and to Laura as well for presenting this today. Really just kind of want to presenting the cybersecurity issues that we are working on in this state and some of the things to think about in other states as you guys continue to, as each state continues to build this out, or regional or local PSAPs begin to implement the next Gen 911. So we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide. One of the things that we have, we're big on asking the question why. And so for hackers, and why would they want to hack into a 911 system? And these are the top 6 reasons that we have found that the reason why hackers hack to begin with, clearly to make money. And it's funny because I just received a smart brief showing there was an article in the tech portion of USA Today that talked about the increase in hacking and how there were 312 major breaches this past year, and how the hackers have become more organized, and there's actually organized groups that are now much more unified than it used to be, just random as it was. Clearly, there's to make money, political reasons, stealing of information, some type of warfare activity. Some just do it for the challenge, and then some just do it for bragging rights, although that one has clearly decreased as the value of it has continued on. And that's one thing that we have added. I know the Homeland Security Office of Emergency Communications, they have 4 key risk terms: threat, vulnerability, likelihood, and consequence. We've actually added a risk term in our state, and it's the value. You know, what's resellable? What of the information is resellable? What is it we can look for? And we ask that because we don't carry credit card information. We don't have Social Security information. But what information do we have that is of value? So we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide. The few ways of a very high level of how people hack. One is the reconnaissance, just basically researching, using Google or any other type of information that they can, scanning it. That's essentially where they kind of just take an overview of your network, see if there are vulnerabilities and so forth. Third type is just to gain access, to exploit the vulnerabilities and then just begin to get into the system. Fourth one is maintain access. Once they've gained it, then how can they maintain it? And the biggest one and then is the cover the tracks. Once you're in, how can you stay in and nobody know that you're in? You can go on to the next one. The next few slides are some statistics that were quite disturbing in some case. One being, 31% of victims who were breached, they figured it out internally. 69 of them were from an external, such as some type of software you may have, or if you IT or whatever you have in your system. That's kind of how 69% of them figured it out by an external. It wasn't an internal. One of the craziest things that we noticed is that usually it's an average of 205 days before you realize somebody's on your network. And so at 6 to 7 months there, somebody's on your network before you even realize it. If you'll please move on to the next slide. And so we gave to show you that clearly the U.S. is the most hacked country, and it kind of moves down the line. But 37% of all attacks happen here in the United States. If you'll move on to the next slide. This one was important because we really wanted to show government is always the largest target. Makes up, right at 25% of it. Industry being another 16%. So if you add the two together, since that's kind of what 911 is. It's a combination of government and industry coming together. We pose the biggest threat as we continue to move forward. If you'll go on to the next one. And here's some research of why the biggest reasons they do it: cybercrime, hacktivism, just getting into a system, the warfare, and the espionage. To the next slide. This is the attack techniques. You'll realize on this slide that 25% of them is unknown. There's not enough information to tell why someone was wanting to get into the system. I think our biggest fear from a 911 standpoint is the denial of service, and you'll realize that 18% make up of hacking, and this is why this was their technique, just complete shut down the system. And so, being 911, that's our biggest fear, and yet it makes up almost a fifth of all attacks is this methodology. And if you'll move on to the next slide. Some of the concerns we have for 911 is clearly the denial of service. Then we have potential discovery and abuse of the PSAPs, 10-digit trunk, also for the IP protocol systems as we continue to build out. The inability or abuse of the internal transfer. You'll notice this word on this slide and the next slide, the word harvesting. It is, this is where it came back to value. When we were looking at what information we do house in 911, we want to know what could be used, what's resellable. I mentioned earlier, we don't store credit card information. We don't store Social Security numbers. So those are the two most common types of things that are for hackers to resell. But harvesting is a thing that has become more popular. It is where you take bits and pieces of information and use it in order to get to the next bit of information. So if you could take somebody's name, number, address, that's one step, two steps, three steps closer to getting to a Social Security number or a credit card or such. And if you'll go on to the next slide as well. And you'll see that the harvesting of this is just the getting what information you can continues to lead to further attacks. And so at first glance, we were thinking we didn't have a ton of valuable information currently. Now, in the next-gen world, it's different. The further you build out, the implementation of medical records, connecting to EMS providers, whatever it is, the more information we'll have, the more value we have. The reality is we have a lot of valuable information now because it allows to get to greater information. So go on to the next slide. This one is what can we expect in the future? Unfortunately, the great part about Next-Gen 911 is the ability of an IP world and greater transitions, mobility, all the great things of Next-Gen. It also puts a bigger target on our back. And we looked at other industries and kind of looking at what can we expect, and healthcare was one of the closest ones we've had. For the last decade, they have moved to their version of next-gen systems and electronic medical records. Healthcare has continued to be, over the past 5 years, continued to be the largest growing industry of cyber attacks. And even in the article in the USA Today, it showed that healthcare attacks were up 23%. And so the more information, the bigger we grow, the more IP capable we are, the more likelihood of, more of a target on our backs to some extent. And the more people want to get the information that we have. We also have an issue, and the third point is talking about the greater concern of cyber attacks among CPE vendors will cause these vendors to increase security efforts beyond what they're already performing. One of the things that we have to remember as we go forward is not only do we have the network that transfers the IP calls, we then have the CPE that contains them, the CAD systems that's connected, the mapping systems that's connected, other agencies that access the information that we're housing, the different types of things. These are all issues that it's unfortunately it's multifaceted, and if you go on to the next slide. These are just some of the next two slides are talking about some of the best practice we have, more robust authentication, keep the antivirus up to date. Training is the big thing. multiple layers of security. One of the things that, an example we had, as we begin to talk about cybersecurity in our state and how do we do it. So our state network is actually it's multifaceted. Mainly the education systems of Alabama use our network. It's a state-owned network. And so all the public schools, universities, we're all on the same IP backbone. And so as we're realizing this, we realized although we have good security measures in place, we need greater measures. Within 2 weeks of our first conversation about this, we had a student at a local university who was trying to hack into the university system. Without realizing what he was doing, he then hacked into the education network. He was able to get through the education network and then get to our 911 system. And it created a denial of service attack on one of our routers. Thankfully, it worked out properly, and it was a great test trial for us, and it also proved the point. So one of the things we've now done is in our network is we have now put in more firewalls. We updated all the routers. And one of the things that we were not able to do as much as we wanted to previously, but we can now, is if there is a issue at a PSAP, we can now, to mitigate that, clearly we have more firewalls in place. We know it immediately. We can actually shut that PSAP off until we can mitigate the problem. And that way it doesn't continue to progress into the further steps and affect more PSAPs at once. If you'll move on to the next one. Properly designed network architecture. Constantly talking with our vendors, trying to figure out what's the best way, what are the best things to do. Configure all the computers and network devices into tools. This next one's perform security assessments. This is a big one for us because, to me, our biggest concern is always at the PSAP level. The likelihood of getting straight to the network is slim to none. You're going to have to, more than likely, the chances are that what we believe is getting through to a PSAP. And things that we normally take for granted is just a flash drive. If you want to plug up your smartphone, one of the tests we had is you plug up the smartphone to the computer just to charge it. Well, any smartphone, anytime you plug it up to a computer, it automatically the computer wants to recognize the smartphone. Well, the moment that did it hit the firewall that somebody was trying to access the computer, so it shuts it down. It's things of this nature that you just normally wouldn't think about, easily can shut down the entire system. The flip side to having more security is also it's more sensitive, and that's an example of nothing more of just not recognizing a smartphone can take down an entire 911 CPE system. And so that's one of the things. The dedicating more resources, I think the data management of an IP world is going to continue to grow. The amount of information that we have, I don't think we can fully realize how much that information is going to be currently, especially the more text messaging becomes more popular, video messaging. As that grows, the management of all of that data and the security of it, I don't think that even in our state, even though we've continued to test, we're looking at different things, I still don't think we can fully realize the capability of how to handle all of that. And that's one of the things that going forward is trying to understand how to manage it and keep it secure at all times and putting the proper steps in place. The monitoring and analyzing it is clearly you'll have your firewalls. Clearly the vendor will be doing the call routing and securing that, making sure nothing happens. But then at the local PSAP, that's where you cannot train enough, you cannot monitor enough, you cannot perform enough assessments at each local PSAP. That's your number one fear, we believe, going forward, is what's that. As we kind of say internally, we're always one flash drive and a USB port away from shutting the thing down. And so the more we can train on best uses, best practices, the better off we are. And it's one of the things that we're looking at in the state is providing more training for such services. And I want to give a special thanks to Chris Tucker. He is a 911 director here in Alabama. He has many certifications, but he's also a certified ethical hacker. And so he's on our committee. He provided a lot of these slides. He's helped tremendously with this, and wanted to give him a special thanks for the work that he's done. And my contact information is on the next slide, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions from anyone out there? And thank you, Jason. All right. Evelyn Bailey, can you please chat in your question because we do not have you connected to the audio? Do we have any other questions out there?
Dane, this is Laura. If I could ask Jason a question, this isn't exactly technical, but if you knew what you know now, what advice would you give folks with regard to how they write their procurements and their contracts related to the issue of cybersecurity?
I would dedicate an entire section of an RFP. We're actually working on a new RFP for a new vendor in the future for us, and that's a big part of it. The steps, it's one of the parts of a procurement phase that I don't think can be detailed enough, quite frankly. It's understanding fully of a vendor system, understanding fully of how the measures they take and the processes, the systems that they use on a security standpoint, understanding how, if they connect to an IP network that they don't own, like if it's not all one entity, which most of them are not, it's you have 3 or 4 working parts working together, understanding, making sure there's clear information of how each party works together, leaving no room for what we thought they were doing it and having another one thinking they were doing it, have it clearly set out from the very beginning of who looks after what, who monitors what, which knock is this, the communication of it. That's one of the things that we were big on, and about a year and a half ago, we kind of redid our phone tree when something is to happen. Who talks to who's the first call, things of that information that I don't think it needs to be clearly stated. They should never leave that to an assumption. And I think sometimes we may leave that when we think this company's watching this, when reality that company actually believes another company's watching it. And so the more detailed you can get through that process, the better. And leaving no room to chance. And one thing I believe in is overlap. And you can never have. It's always better to have 2 companies watch part of it than just one.
Jason, I actually have a comment here from Evelyn, and she says that there's an interesting report about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure released this week, and it shows that there's been a dramatic increase in these attacks. So what you are talking about is not hypothetical, but real.
No, absolutely. And what better way to attack a system than shut down the communications portion of it? And so, and that's our biggest fear is, yes, there is information that could potentially be of value, but it's the clear denial of service across the board. And I really think we in 911 will mirror what healthcare is currently going through. The more you migrate to next gen 911, the more the attacks will increase. And I really think the local PSAP will be the number one target. I think it's probably your greatest vulnerability as well.
All right, and now we have a question from Randy Richmond.
Yes, I'm curious how much of this can be addressed purely from the EZNet point of view, or how much of this has to be handled at the PSAPs itself?
For the majority of it, we can handle it from the EZNet standpoint. We can, from the call routing standpoint to the delivery of the IP call. Most of that, and I can't stress enough, you need to have multiple points, multiple firewalls, multiple points of mitigation. We did not have enough points. Although it worked as designed, we realized coming back we still not have enough parts in play to make sure that we could fully mitigate an issue. I believe probably 90% of it can be done at the EZNet level, but it's the connection of a PSAP to the network. That's where you kind of get out of the state function. Like in our state specifically, we lose control as we connect, and so we put in firewalls there, and we can mitigate most of the problems. But you still have a PSAP problem of it. Even if it doesn't affect the entire system, you can still affect one PSAP.
All right, a couple people are typing in, it looks like. So just one moment here. I see a couple more people are typing in. Does anyone else have any questions?
Dave, I could, while we're waiting, this is Lori again, sort of like the host prerogative. Jason, if you could just share a little bit about sort of the testing you did, because I think some of the things you did were really interesting in terms of how you tried to, frankly, break your own network.
Yeah, we because we have essentially two moving parts to our state network. We have the network, the call delivery portion, the IP part, and then we have just the call routing part. And it's two different companies. One's a state agency, one's an actual vendor. And so to making sure how the two connect, how the two are integral part of delivering the service. Both sides, we pretty much hacked our own network, and we really trying to test all vulnerabilities that we had, and we used a lot of resources in state. We're very blessed in Alabama to have a lot of educated people in different areas, and so being able to bring a team together and solve a lot of issues that way. But one thing we did is we had people essentially hack our own network and highlight the parts that the clear vulnerabilities we had, and then the potential vulnerabilities. Kind of put it into a stop sign, stoplight, so to be. Red was couldn't get into it all. Yellow was potential. Green was clear, probable, vulnerability. And so I really think we should do more of that. And as we continue to build out our network in the future and begin really delivering the calls through IP, I believe we will try to do. I personally would love to see us to do every PSAP that way. I would love to have a hacker go into each PSAP and see how quickly they could get through their network and then connecting to ours. And I don't think you can. It's basically a self-assessment is kind of how we look at it, and I don't think we can do enough of that.
All right, I didn't get any more questions that come in, so thank you, Jason. And Lori, do you have any closing remarks? Actually, it just came in, sorry. And this is from Randy Richmond. Actually, I had a couple here now. Randy Richmond asks, in the state of Alabama, does the state provide security for the ESINet while the individual PSAPs are responsible for the security of their CPE? Does the state provide resources to assist the PSAPs?
Currently, we provide for the state EZNet. We are not delivering calls IP, so as of now, it is each PSAPs on their own. In the future, it is my hope that we do provide that as a resource to each PSAP as well.
All right, and this comes from Green Morris, and he asks, Can you tell me what recommendations you have for security on DN abuse?
I'm sorry, I cut out on what abuse?
DN, possibly DNS abuse.
I cannot give you a real technical answer. That's that's why I hire people. I think that's probably the biggest thing.
I'm sorry, directory number abuse.
I'm sorry, the phone still cut out.
I'm sorry, Jason. They asked, do you have any recommendations for security on directory number abuse?
We do not now. It's one of the things that we have put on our list to do, especially as we go forward. Alabama, we're not delivering IP calls technically, and so as we continue to build it out and then have our own system to monitor, essentially, that's one of the things that is on our list, but we have not tackled that one yet.
All right.
And
okay.
Please, we're just in the beginning stages. These are lessons learned from the very beginning, and there'll be much more to be happy to share, and happy to share our mistakes as well as our successes.
And Green Morris writes back, translations with CLECS can block access to this number. But Jason, we thank you for your time. And Lori, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, again, I'd like to thank Jason for participating on the webinar. What you've done in Alabama is really impressive, and cyber is, we're already hearing an awful lot about it. We're going to hear more, so we really appreciate you being willing to share your experiences in Alabama. I think they will only be helpful moving forward to others as they move forward with their own networks. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jason. And this concludes today's webinar. We appreciate everyone's participation. An archived version of today's webinar will be available on 911.gov soon. The next seminar is scheduled for Tuesday, June 9th at 12 noon Eastern Time. We hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you and have a great day.